Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into a seriously incredible piece of history today. I want you to picture something for a second. Imagine you're standing on a cold hill in Europe. The wind is totally still, the sky is a heavy gray, and right in front of you, there's a young man looking out at the world. He's not particularly tall, he doesn't instantly look like a guy who holds a lot of power, but inside his mind, there's an absolute fire burning, a massive dream, and a question that's literally destined to change history forever.
So, what is that question? Well, how exactly did a boy from a tiny, quiet island, a totally marginalized outsider, rise to become one of the most famous and influential human beings to ever live? It's honestly like a giant puzzle. To figure it out, we're going to travel back in time and trace the exact chronological events that completely shaped his destiny.
Chapter 1. The Boy from Corsica.
Now, every historic journey has an origin story, right? And this one starts far away from the glitz and glamour of the big European cities. It starts on a small island in the Mediterranean Sea. The year is 1769. Napoleon Bonaparte is born into a proud, pretty simple family. They weren't super wealthy. He was actually the second of 8 children. His dad was a lawyer, but it was really his mother, Letizia, who ran the show. She was this incredibly strong, serious woman. She ran her chaotic, busy household with strict discipline, and she drilled a fierce work ethic right into her kids. She taught Napoleon from day one that life isn't handed to you, and you absolutely must fight for every single thing you want.
And he was just different from the get-go. While the house around him was loud and crazy with all those kids, young Napoleon was quiet, he was serious, and he was deeply focused. The kid was absolutely obsessed with reading. Even as a little boy, his mind was going a mile a minute, analyzing historical battles and daydreaming about great leaders in war. He was basically hungry for a grand purpose.
Chapter 2. A Lonely Military Education.
Imagine being just 9 years old. At that age, a monumental decision sends him away from his island home to a military school in France. That is a massive leap. He goes from this quiet island into a powerful, noisy foreign country. Fast forward a bit, and by the age of 16, he graduates in Paris completely ready to be a soldier. But man, those years in between, they were incredibly tough.
See, France was rich in culture, but for Napoleon, it was profoundly lonely. He spoke French with this really thick Corsican accent. So all these wealthy, super well-connected French boys, they mocked him. They called him names, and they treated him like a total outsider. They literally told him he wasn't really French, and he felt that sting, deeply.
But here's the thing about Napoleon. He absolutely refused to cry about it, and he flat out refused to give up. Instead, he took all that isolation and channeled it into intense academic focus. He studied way harder than anyone else around him. He mastered mathematics, he completely devoured geography and history, just reading everything he could get his hands on. He actually started to believe that being different wasn't a weakness, it's what made him special. And out of all that discipline, he built this quiet, unshakable confidence.
Chapter 3. Rise to the Throne.
So Napoleon steps out of school and straight into a highly dangerous, totally unrecognizable world. It's the late 1780s. The poor in France are starving and furious, while the elite are just living it up in their palaces. Then, bam, 1789 hits, and the French Revolution begins. The old world is literally crumbling apart in this huge storm of noise and fear. But Napoleon understands something crucial here. Amid all the chaos of a revolution, massive opportunities open up for those who can act fast and think clearly. He was incredibly brave, he made lightning-fast decisions, and he really started to inspire the soldiers around him.
24. I want you to think about that number for a second. At 24 years old, this once lonely boy from Corsica, the same kid who was bullied and laughed at in the schoolyard, was promoted to general. It's just an extraordinary achievement that really puts the sheer scale of his military brilliance into perspective. And the craziest part? He was really only getting started.
He leveraged all that momentum perfectly. First, he wins battle after massive battle in Italy and Egypt, becoming a bona fide national hero. Then, in 1799, he makes this incredibly fast, highly calculated, and honestly dangerous move to just seize control of the French government. And finally, in 1804, in a scene of just unmatched audacity inside Notre Dame Cathedral, surrounded by all these politicians and royals. He doesn't even wait for anyone else to do it. He picks up the crown and places it right on his own head, Emperor of France.
So now, as emperor, he's controlling most of Europe. He actually brings order to a continent that had been drowning in chaos for years. He builds roads, creates schools, and establishes legal systems that we still use today. But, as we know,
Holding on to immense power is tricky. Despite all the great systems he built, his absolute power meant he was never, ever truly satisfied. He constantly wanted more.
Chapter 4. The Russian Disaster.
And that endless ambition, it led to a fatal mistake. In 1812, he decides to invade Russia, and he brings a staggering 600,000 men with him. 600,000! It was the largest army in the history of Europe at the time, and they were marching straight into this massive, freezing, and incredibly difficult landscape.
The Russian strategy was absolutely devastating. They simply refused to fight him directly. Instead, they used this ruthless, scorched earth tactic. They kept pulling back, literally burning their own villages and destroying all their own food, just so Napoleon's men would have absolutely nothing to survive on. By the time the French finally reached Moscow, the city was completely empty. And then, the brutal, unimaginable Russian winter set in. These soldiers didn't just die in battle. They died from the agonizing freezing cold, from terrible hunger, and from total exhaustion. The retreat from Russia quickly became one of the saddest, most devastating events in military history. Over half of that massive army never made it back. This disaster fundamentally broke something inside the empire. The cracks were showing, and the whole world suddenly realized Napoleon was not invincible.
Chapter 5. Exile and the End.
Seeing the emperor weakened like this, the combined forces of Europe, we're talking England, Prussia, Austria, Russia, they all team up to force him out, and his downfall is incredibly fast. In 1814, he's exiled to the island of Elba. But he doesn't just sit there. Barely 10 months later, he stages this brilliant escape right back to France, and the soldiers sent to arrest him actually end up joining him. But this dramatic comeback was short-lived. In June 1815, the English General Wellington and his allies hand Napoleon his ultimate, final defeat at Waterloo. No escape this time. He's shipped off to the incredibly remote island of St. Helena.
And there, quiet and completely alone, he lives out his final 6 years. In 1821, he dies. He was just 51 years old. It was such a quiet end for the boy from Corsica, the outsider who had managed to conquer an entire continent and shape an entire era of history.
Now, it's really important that we look objectively at this extremely complicated life. He was certainly not a perfect man. His story is packed with terrible mistakes. War is never simple, and his endless military campaigns caused immense suffering and pain right alongside his historical greatness. We have to impartially acknowledge the really heavy, destructive cost of his reign.
So what's our takeaway from analyzing all these sources today? I think this quote distills the core lesson just beautifully. Despite his deep flaws, think about where he started, an outsider, laughed at for how he spoke, told by society that his future was already capped, but he completely refused to accept that. Through intense study, incredibly hard work, and just pure determination, he completely rewrote his destiny. The cost was undoubtedly high, but the sheer power of that transformation, you really can't deny it.
And that leaves us with one final thought for today's explainer. Every single step you take to understand something new, it's a victory. If a marginalized, mocked kid from a tiny island can literally change the course of human history through sheer effort and education, well, where is your own journey of learning going to take you? Keep pushing, keep focusing, and never stop learning. Catch you next time.